Hello, future Rossies and pre-med explorers. This is Milena Garcia, your host for Ross University Checking the Pulse, a pre-med podcast. This is our mini podcast featuring facts and information about our medical program, insights from current students, and tips from practicing physicians. Each week, this podcast will be broken down in small episodes, focusing on one aspect of our program, also having guests talk about their own experiences as students and as doctors. In recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month, we will be talking about imposter syndrome in this episode. Have you ever doubted your own skills and accomplishments? Or maybe thought, I think somebody made a mistake, I don't belong here. If so, you may have experienced imposter syndrome. Although it's not officially recognized, it can be prevalent in those who are different from their peers, particularly in underrepresented demographics. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Karie Gaska and our current student, Kinza Javed. Welcome back, future Aussies. Thanks for joining us again. So this episode, we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. This topic has come up on several conversations that I've had with current students. And if you're following our podcast, you may have heard it already. And I guess I didn't realize how serious and how prevalent this really is. So today, our guest will be talking a little bit more about what this is and what it means. Dr. Gaska, thank you for joining us. Student Dr. Kinza, thank you for joining us. Let's have a moment to have you introduce ourselves. Dr. Gaska, we'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Dr. Karie Gaska. I am an assistant professor in behavioral science and the discipline lead for behavioral sciences here on the Barbados campus. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and my background is also in public health and social work. I have a PhD from Georgia State University in clinical and community psychology, a master's in social work from Howard University, go Bison, and a bachelor's in ethnic studies and psychology from Brown University, and I'm from Long Island, New York originally.
Kinza?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kinza Javed, and I'm a third-year medical student. I just finished IMF in December of 2020. I am currently in Connecticut. This is where I went to undergrad. I went to University of Connecticut. I have dual degrees in psychology and biology. And I started my medical journey in 2019. I was the first class to be starting in Barbados when they first opened. So thank you for having me here.
And I thank you both for your time. Let's start from the beginning. And the beginning for me is really the beginning. How is this spelled? I've seen it both ways. Dr. Gaska, how is imposter syndrome spelled?
Yeah, so I've seen it both ways too. And so you brought this up to me. So I did a little bit of research into it. So impostor, OR, is the way that the word imposter is originally, that's the quote unquote correct spelling of the word. And when imposter phenomenon was first described in the psychological literature, they used the OR. And over time, people started using ER. And now it's acceptable to use ER or OR interchangeably, but OR is kind of the original appropriate term. But we don't say that ER is wrong. It's just something that developed over time.
And what is it? What does this mean?
First of all, it's not an official diagnosis. It's not something that you see in the DSM, or it's not a disease, right? It's just a phenomenon. It's a noticeable pattern of behavior. And so it was first coined in the late 70s by researchers from my alma mater, Georgia State University psychology program. They noticed this phenomenon among high-achieving women. And now we know it occurs among all types of people. It's not just women. But despite their numerous achievements and accolades, they really kind of struggled with that internal experience of accepting that was true. So it, as the title suggests, it's that feeling like you're an imposter, like you don't belong, feeling that people are going to find out the truth about you and realize that you're a fraud, fearing like that you're not enough or that you can't succeed. And when you do have successes, a lot of those experiences are not really internalized. Like you'll say, oh, I just got lucky, or oh, it was really easy to do and anybody could have done it. And maybe when you see somebody else achieve something, you think, oh, they're so smart. They got it. They know what they're doing, but not me. It was just kind of luck. And so that negating, downplaying the things that you're good at and feeling like, you're not really bright. You're the one who've like fooled everybody else. And for med students, it might kind of come up as, maybe you think you were mistakenly admitted to med school and feeling like the admissions committee is going to find out and kick you out or something like that, always feeling like you're not really who people think you are.
And Kinza, we appreciate you sharing your personal experience with this. I realize it's a very personal topic, so thank you for volunteering to share your personal experience. How has it been for you going through this?
So before I had started medical school, I experienced something very harsh, and since then, it kept coming up. So I never always had imposter syndrome. It was after certain events that kind of triggered it inside of me. The very first situation that I encountered regarding this was I told somebody when they asked me where I'm going to medical school, and I told them I was going to RUSM. And then they asked me, oh, we're not familiar. Where is that? And I told them, oh, it's going to be in Barbados. And all of a sudden, their tone completely changed from being excited and intrigued about the fact that I was in med school to something more negative. And I could just feel it. I could feel the energy changing. And they said, and I quote, were you not smart enough to get into a U.S. med school? And at that point, I didn't know how to answer that. It was the very first time I encountered something like that. I didn't even think people were so negative and harsh towards Caribbean med students prior to this. So I had nothing to say. I was completely speechless. And then since then, I've heard so many people have similar ideas about Caribbean med students and how they are not smart enough and how they just get in because the admissions process is so easy, and that's why these doctors can't be trusted, etc. Just opinions that are completely wrong because they don't understand that medical school is medical school no matter where you go. No matter what it's called, it's still medical school. We're still learning the same things. We still have exams. We still have to sit for the licensing exams. We still see patients, and we're still bound by oath, to protect and heal our patients. So really, how can it matter so much that if I went to a different school, I'm just automatically considered less than somebody else?
Yeah. Dr. Gaska, why does it happen? Why does imposter syndrome happen?
Well, imposter syndrome is common among lots of people, but particularly for people from marginalized groups. It can be from a really real place of being oppressed or discriminated against. So for people from underrepresented communities who've gotten messages that are implicit or maybe even explicit, that they don't belong, that they aren't as good, they're not good enough. And maybe folks who weren't necessarily from a marginalized community or underrepresented background who got messages from parents or caregivers. You might have heard your brother is the smart one and you were not the smart one or something like that. So these kind of consistent messages that are explicit or implicit of not being enough, not being smart enough, not being good enough, and people internalizing those views. So it comes from a really real place, and it's not something that, there's something wrong with the person, right? It is just a way sometimes that we internalize these messages that we get.
And how do you feel this affects our students?
Yes, I can go for this one. So for me personally, Dr. Gaska mentioned how you tend to internalize your failures and not your successes. And this I cannot agree on more, because that's what I used to do when I was in basic sciences. Anytime I worked hard and, studied really hard and got a very good grade, I would genuinely just think that the exam was too easy, or that I just got lucky, or that I just chose the right answers or whatever. And then anytime I would not get a good grade that I wanted, or, I would just think, okay, this is proof that I don't belong here. This is proof, everyone used to tell me I'm not smart. And now, well, not everyone, but, the people who think you're not smart enough, this is proof for them that, see, you don't belong here. And that was the biggest struggle for me personally, was to just not being able to internalize anytime I did something good, but always thinking it's my fault for something going wrong and not the situation or the exam. And I want to make it clear that anytime I got a bad grade and a good grade, there was really not much of a difference between my understanding of the topics or how much time I spent studying for them, or how hard I worked, because I think when I think back now, the efforts were similar. It's just that sometimes some exams are much harder and you don't anticipate how you will perform on them versus others. And that was always a big, concern for me personally, was that failures were always my fault, no matter the situation.
Yeah, I think in not RUSM in particular, I think med school in general, and even before med school, like those STEM fields, those pre-med tracks, I think that the culture of medicine and pre-med can be really harsh. And it kind of makes a lot of sense that students would struggle with this, right? So students often get messages in the STEM fields like they're not good enough, they're not smart enough, they're not going to get into med school or grad school or whatever the thing that they're trying to work for as students. And I think that the culture needs to change. I think that the culture, there's kind of this lingering thing among not just medical doctors, but I'll speak also from PhDs as well. Like, I suffered, so you have to suffer, and we have to be harsh, and we can't spoon feed students. And the harder we are, the stronger that they're going to be. And that toughness, that harshness works for some people, but that toughness and that harshness doesn't work for everybody.
And personally, I have to share, I was surprised of how often I kept hearing it from the current students. How prevalent is it in medical school?
Yeah, so it's not just a Ross thing. It's not just a Caribbean medical school thing. It is definitely across the board, U.S. med schools, grad schools, very common among academics. I was looking, and again, it's not an official diagnosis or anything like that, so we don't have like the prevalence rates, but I was looking at a paper that kind of gives like a good kind of cross-sectional study of med students in the U.S., and it was about half of women and 25% of men who are feeling like, not necessarily I have imposter syndrome, but we're struggling with those feelings of feeling like an imposter, that I'm not good enough, or not being able to internalize the successes, thinking that they're lucky or that they don't belong and things like that. So it's super common.
And what can the students do to cope or prevent it? Is it possible? Kinza, we'll start with you.
Yes, it's definitely possible. So from where I was to where I am now in terms of coping with imposter syndrome, I would say that the one thing that worked for me was to stop comparing, because everyone's journey is different and nobody knows exactly what you're going through or how much, hard work you do, or, nobody knows about your hustle. And so whether you're in the Caribbean or in the United States, everyone is very, very different from you. So comparison is the, death of joy. I think, we have to really consider the fact that once we start comparing ourselves to other people, we are generally not going to be happy with whatever we accomplish. And I think another quote that really resonates with me used to be, "A lion does not concern themselves with an opinion of a sheep." And I think, not to brag too much about yourself, but also know that your accomplishments are your accomplishments for a reason. Be confident about what you accomplish and achieve versus just telling yourself, "Oh, you got lucky." Because if you got lucky, then for every single thing, think about how unrealistic that sounds. That same goes for failure too. Not every failure is going to be because you're not good enough or you're stupid or you don't belong. Some failures just happen because they're lessons. And if you concern too much about what other people will say about you, you will genuinely never feel satisfied with anything in your life, whether it's personal or career related. The other thing for me that worked was I relied on my peers, and I had a really amazing support group. And if you have family that motivates you, please rely on them, talk to them. If you have friends who are there for you, talk to them, share your problems. If you don't have either of that, there are clubs in schools that talk about imposter syndrome. I was a president of medical genetics interest group, and I believe I was the first club that year to talk about imposter syndrome. I created that panel and I brought students together and we talked about how it affects us, what we can do going forward. Dr. Gaska was part of that. Thank you. And other than that, there's also professors. There are also, student council. There's a lot of resources just in school itself, whether you're in Ross or anywhere else, that you can rely on. So those are my two advice for students.
Dr. Gaska, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think Kinza is definitely spot on in what she's doing, and so glad to hear that things are going better. In terms of prevention, just to back it up a little bit, I think prevention, it really isn't anything an individual can do, like to prevent it. Prevention really is about, the broader structure. And so to me, if I'm thinking about, okay, how do we prevent this in our students? We have to look at our institutional wide message and, beyond Ross, our society-wide message, our med school cultures, and how do we make it so that marginalized students are more represented, right? How do we show students that they belong? How do we create a culture where we're telling students that they are going to be doctors, they are going to be successful, they do belong here, right? So how do we create this messaging that that's what students get from the beginning, that they belong here? Kinza was spot on when she was talking about not comparing yourself to others. That shift from constant comparison is definitely the thing that is going to help with imposter syndrome, but I know that it's not easy. You're not alone in this feeling, right? This is super common. And so seeking others with a similar experience, talking about it, having your friend group, having your peer group to be honest with what's going on with you is super important. Learning how to ask for and accept help is really part of the journey, not only with imposter syndrome, with just kind of growing into yourself as a professional. So it's something that's going to be lifelong. Listing your accomplishments, as Kinza said, is something that you should definitely do, whether that is, giving yourself a big kind of check board on your mirror, or giving yourself positive affirmations, or rewarding yourself after every mini, whatever it is, but really trying to do something to internalize those accomplishments. Getting a mentor, you have like an assigned mentor for sure at Ross, but finding mentors throughout your career is really important. You have this chance to see somebody who is, an MD or in a place that you want to be, is saying like, hey, I know you're feeling this way. I felt this way too. Dr. Gaska felt this way too. When I was a grad student, it was definitely something that I struggled with. And something as an academic, I still sometimes feel feelings about, right? So it's not something that all of us aren't also going through. You can also ask for help through the counseling center. I think that is a great source of support. And the last thing with students, I think, is, this is your time to be students. Embrace being a student. You're not supposed to know everything. You're not supposed to always have the right answer. The reason that you're in med school is to become a doctor. If you knew everything and you were doing it perfect, you wouldn't need to be here. So really embrace this time in your life where you don't have to have the answer all the time. It's okay to say, like, actually, I don't know that thing, because guess what? You can go look it up. You can talk to your friends. You can talk to your mentor. You can talk to your peers. You can read about it. You can learn about it, right? So you can practice. You can get better. And so this is your time to be doing that. So really embrace that part of your careers. Like, this is the time where you don't know it. And that's okay, because you're going to practice and you're going to get better. In terms of Ross, I think Kinza's group did a great job having an imposter syndrome panel. I know other groups have also taken that on. I think Black Male Docs did a session last semester with the counseling center. So I think it's a topic that keeps coming up and is of interest to a lot of the student clubs. Always reach out to the counseling center if you want to do some more work. And my last plug will be a little bit for mind-body medicine. If that is something that you're interested in, I feel like the core of mind-body medicine is genuine connection to your peers in an honest way. And I think that's kind of what Kinza was talking about when she was saying, talking to other people, talking to your family. And during her panel, I'll just give her a little bit of credit here. She came up with an activity where students shared their fears anonymously. And that honest sharing is so much part of coping with imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. And mind-body medicine in particular is something that was created with Ross to have a place to be honest and genuine with a small group of peers. So I can't plug that enough.
This has been a great conversation, very insightful, very personal for me as well, because I keep hearing about it, and now I understand the depth and the importance of it and the impact it has on the students personally. Kinza, thank you for sharing your personal experience. Dr. Gaska, thank you for sharing your background and the scientific side of it. This has been great. The message I think here today is for everybody listening, future doctors, recognize yourselves for the efforts and the accomplishments that you've had, right? Thank you both. I appreciate your time. It's good to have you here. And Kinza, come back anytime.
Okay, I will. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Ross University Checking the Pulse, a pre-med podcast. This is Milena Garcia, your host. This podcast is made for you, so let me know what topics you want us to cover on future episodes. You can send me your comments, feedbacks, and requests to mgarcia@rossu.edu. Definitely follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube channel at Ross Med School, or on Facebook. If you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, I am working my way to 5 stars, so remember to send me your comments and let me know your ideas. If you're on Spotify, remember to click on the follow button to get our future episodes. All right, see you future Rossies and Pre-Med Explorers next week.